Welcome everyone to College Football Time with Avery Miguel. Avery, how's it going?
It's going great, Miguel. Happy Monday. The sun is finally out down here in Florida. It's been raining all weekend, but being inside, got to see a lot of college football this weekend. Let's get into it.
Yes,
Yes, so
Clemson,
Clemson,
Jordan
Jordan
Command
Command
over Syracuse from the
from the
beginning.
beginning.
What was
What
your
was your
reaction over
reaction
this?
over this? I was very surprised because Clemson this season has been a tale of two football teams. You have them starting the season against Duke, and I felt they didn't take Duke too seriously, which is why they got beat in a convincing fashion. But this past Saturday versus Syracuse, I think they showed, hey, we are still a premier football team. The ACC is still a premier conference. And not only did Clemson show that when they needed to show that they were the best football team or could be the best football team in the ACC, they did it by going into Syracuse and winning in a convincing fashion. And what we mentioned in our pregame analysis, I mentioned it was going to be the defense that was going to be the key for either teams. And for Clemson, it definitely was 5 sacks, three forced fumbles, and their quarterback, Kate Kubrick, he was very good on Saturday. His statistics don't show it, but even with 263 yards, two touchdowns, he made a point of saying when we need to score, we score. But overall, it was the defense. And I don't think Syracuse should hang their head on this. It was a big point margin. They lost by 17 points. But I think them starting 4-0, both teams are now in conference play. Both teams now are at the point where they need to show where they're going to be in the ACC title race. So for Clemson, I think their next three games are going to be very poignant. The next three games, they have Wake Forest, they have Miami, and they have NC State. Those last two, I think, are going to be the real test. Miami, they're coming off a bye week, but they are still hungry. And the third team, NC State, lost a heartbreaker over the weekend on Friday night to Louisville. And even Louisville is in that conversation. When you're looking at Syracuse, their next three games are definitely a test. They have North Carolina, they have FSU, and they have Virginia Tech. Three teams that definitely want to make a statement. And I think with college football this season, you have all these conferences that are realigning, that are adding teams. Teams are going other conferences. They really want to prove that they can be the best. And the ACC is one of those teams everybody can talk about. SEC, which I think is very competitive conference, but the ACC is very competitive too because on any given week, teams can play from their conference and it can be, just a surprise like we saw at the beginning of the season with Clemson and Duke, but you can also see these other great games in the conference. And I think these next 3 weeks are going to be really poignant for not only Clemson, but also Syracuse. Syracuse is 4-1. That's not a bad record so far, but they still need to keep that momentum, even with the loss, especially now that they're finishing their season and going into ACC conference play.
Clemson's defense was definitely a key factor into the victory. I knew from the beginning of the game that Syracuse was just not looking right, and they just couldn't they didn't have an answer. So, do you think Clemson will start getting hot now? I know they will be tested, with these next couple of games. But do you think after getting this victory on the road at Syracuse, they will start going on a hot streak?
I think with Clemson's victory against Syracuse, there's a start for it. Like I said, Clemson is a tale of two teams right now, but I think their game against Wake Forest could be the key, but definitely that game with Miami. A friend of mine and I were actually talking about the rest of Miami's schedule. And he was actually giving the edge to Clemson on this one. I know we're talking a bit in the future right now, but he was giving the edge to Clemson. He says that Clemson, of the two, the better football team, but it's just on certain Saturdays they're playing football, and then on certain Saturdays it's like they're napping. But for Clemson, I still think they have that edge. One loss of the next three games, they could be really, really tough tests for them, especially next week against North Carolina. North Carolina has showed to be a very, very complete football team. And not only that, and we've mentioned it in the past, you have these Division 1 uh, more prominent basketball teams that are now making the play of being premier football teams. Look at North Carolina, look at Duke. Duke played a fabulous game against Notre Dame. And over the weekend, everybody was talking, is Duke ready for the big time? Of course, they're ready for the big time. The basketball team has been premier for nearly 35 years. So why not their football team? Duke's schedule, same thing. They're going to be tested. I think that game with Notre Dame showed not only can they be big time, but not only for the rest of the ACC and what is coming up for them, they're really going to say, hey, if you play us, don't count us out. If anything, look at Clemson and how they started the season. But the ACC, I think, is a conference that everyone needs to look out for, not just for Clemson to see how they do in the next 3 weeks, also Syracuse and any team in that conference. We're probably going to see some of the most competitive and poignant play in football probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks with all these teams, especially these more prominent Division 1 basketball teams making a play. And not only just Duke and North Carolina, look at Kansas. Even Northwestern over the weekend was trying to hang into Penn State. And of course, your classic, SEC teams. But this is it's really interesting, especially with all conference realignment, conference talks, new conferences, still the possibility of the Pac-12 no longer existing. Conference play has always been the best key of showing how a football team can react and how they can handle the pressure. Because if you're going into and think you can roll over one of your conference teams and you lose, now all of a sudden you have to say, okay, where did we go wrong? And most of the time it's going to be in the respect of the other team. Most of the time it's going to be confidence. Most of the other team, it could be just pride. But the ACC has got some teams that we really need to pay attention to. And toward the end of the season, when we start to talk about bowl, I would not be surprised if we see a good chunk of these ACC teams playing in bowl games. But over the next 3 weeks, definitely a big test for Clemson, definitely more so for Syracuse. But we're going to see some great football either way.